The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. After Jesus had spoken, a Pharisee invited him to dine at his home. He entered and reclined at table to eat. The Pharisee was amazed to see that he did not observe the prescribed washing before the meal. The Lord said to him, "O you Pharisees, although you cleanse the outside of the cup and the dish, inside you are filled with plunder and evil. You fools! Did not the maker of the outside also make the inside? But as to what is within, give alms. Behold, everything will be clean for you." The Gospel of the Lord. What are we supposed to think of the Old Testament and all of the laws of the Old Testament? You guys remember what the word testament means, literally? It means covenant. So when we talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Scriptures, what we really mean is the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. So we who are members of the New Covenant, what is our relationship to the Old Covenant? So one of the most important questions that comes up in the days of Jesus and in the days of the first apostles. And all week we've been reading this letter of St. Paul to the Galatians, addressing specifically this issue. Now, this letter to the Galatians is one of St. Paul's most polemical letters. It's one of the letters where he gets pretty angry at different times. And so sometimes it might even sound like he exaggerates to a certain extent. And indeed, this was one of the letters that influenced Martin Luther very greatly. Martin Luther, two of his favorite letters in the New Testament was St. Paul's letter to the Romans and also his letter to the Galatians, which again we're reading this week. Martin Luther started off, I don't know if you guys know a whole lot about Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a Catholic priest originally. And because he saw some corruption in the church, he began to kind of make some difficulties there and wanted to reform the church. But by the time he was finished, he had kind of fallen off the deep end. He said some very extreme things. Even today, many modern evangelical Christians would not avow most of the teachings of Martin Luther. Famously, towards the end of his life, he became very anti-Semitic, very anti-Catholic, and indeed some of his interpretations of Scripture were greatly exaggerated. For example, one of the things he did was he read this letter to the Galatians, and he basically concluded that there is no need for good works in life at all. And he concluded that the Old Testament, in many ways, is useless to us now. None of the rules from the old law matter anymore. Now, we as Catholics, we wouldn't totally agree with that. We would agree with it to a certain extent. So I think today's a good opportunity to talk about this, because if you do read the New Testament and you read St. Paul's letters, it is something that comes up over and over again. How are we supposed to think of the Old Testament rules and the Old Testament laws here in this new covenant that we are part of? It's actually not a terribly simple question. It's a little complex. There are different variations of the rules and laws in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament. Some laws God meant to be binding forever. However, other laws were not meant to be binding forever. Some of the laws, for example, like the 10 Commandments about not murdering people, not stealing, those laws were meant to last forever. But other laws, such as the laws of the temple worship and the Old Testament priesthood, those laws were not meant to last forever. And indeed, the law of circumcision was not meant to last forever. This was something people were confused about in the days of Paul. People thought that in order to be a believer in Jesus, in order to be a member of God's people, you had to be circumcised if you were a man. And St. Paul concludes that that was not the case. Why? Why is circumcision not required anymore? It's not required because when it was originally established, it was not a result of God's will, but rather it was a result of God's punishment to Abraham. Remember when circumcision was established? When God asked Abraham to circumcise himself and his whole family? Something very significant happened just before that. Abraham had an affair with his slave, Hagar. Remember? God promised Abraham an heir, a son, and after many years, Abraham still didn't have a son. And so he and his wife Sarah, as an act of disbelief, took matters into their own hands. And Abraham had an affair with the slave Hagar, from which he gave birth to a son, Ishmael. As a punishment for not trusting in God's promise, God established the law of circumcision, instituting that from that day forward, in order to be a member of God's people, you had to be circumcised. But that was never meant to last forever. Jesus and the new covenant, in a certain sense, takes many of those punishments from the old law onto himself, thereby releasing us from that yoke, and therefore we don't need to do them anymore. Not only that, but in the new covenant, circumcision is replaced by something else that was not part of the old law. In the old law, in order to become a member of God's people, you had to be circumcised. In the new law, in order to become a member of God's people, you must be what? Baptized. Very good. That's part of the reason why we don't wait to baptize infants. Just like the Jews of the old law, they didn't wait to circumcise their sons. They did it on the 8th day when they were still infants. So we carry out that practice as well with baptism. So again, this is a very complex issue, and we'll keep talking about it through the rest of this week as we go through the letter of Galatians. But I think it's important for us to try to understand and dive into these things to have a greater understanding of all of salvation history.